Welcome to Just Between Us, a podcast powered by the Corey Johnson Program for Post-Traumatic Healing in Boston.
Every week, we are going to focus on ways to heal from the devastating impact of collective trauma on our world.
My name is Reverend Liz Walker.
And I'm Judelle Cummins.
So let's get started. Judelle, just about everybody this week has either listened to or read about that emotional testimony in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis policeman charged with the death of George Floyd. It was heartbreaking for me to hear. What was your reaction?
It was heartbreaking for me to hear as well, especially listening to the testimonies of the witnesses that were there that day. To hear the 9-year-old girl talk about, I was just on my way to get snacks, and here I am feeling sad and helpless, right? And so it's just this idea of not being able to help someone who you feel needs help, and you feel as though you're capable of helping them, but there's nothing you can do. And so you feel kind of paralyzed, and it's not a good feeling to have to sit with. So absolutely.
It was awful.
Yeah, no.
You know, people may not know all of the kind of clinical definitions of trauma, but our program works with people who have been traumatized. That means that they have been affected in kind of a serious and lasting ways by extreme events. And so collective trauma is when extreme events affect many of us.
Yes.
Think 9/11. Think the insurrection at the nation's capital. Those were all traumatic events. They seem to be happening over and over and over again. Do you think in a neighborhood like ours, and this is an urban area, not unlike the one in Minneapolis, do you think it's something that young people experience often?
I think if you live in an urban area, you definitely experience it often. And even if you're not experiencing it directly, like you have a friend or a family member who is involved in any way when it comes to gun violence or just any type of trauma, you know someone in passing, right? You might not know all your neighbors, but for me, for example, I have a neighbor who I know at 2:00 during the day, he has a liquor bottle in his hand, and the liquor store is right down the street. But you're constantly seeing people. For me, I'm seeing people coping with their day or coping with the trauma in their lives through drinking or just hanging out all day, not working. Just you see it all the time. For people my age, especially, or anybody who lives in an urban area, you know what the deal is.
Yeah, and you're talking about coping. That's really interesting because people are coping with what
Yes.
we have determined is trauma. Trauma is not just about police violence, and that's a horrible situation.
Yes.
But in neighborhoods around the church, in neighborhoods where you live, I mean, we see all kinds of trauma. We see trauma in addictions, people who are barely handling their business on the street. And that might be even traumatic to go through, but traumatic to see.
Yep.
We have trauma that comes from violence in our community, not police-initiated violence, but violence of interpersonal nature, when gangs are fighting or people are having. So it's almost like you're being hit from all sides in a way. Do you feel that way?
Absolutely. It's like you go outside and you know that there are troubles and just different issues that you're going to face outside. And even when you have to face some of those troubles and, experiences in your own home, it's just like, where can I go for peace? Where can I go for a time of rest and not feel as though I have to constantly be alert? When you go outside, just as a human being in general, you're constantly trying to assess the risk. Like, should I go to this place? Not to go into dark alleys, but for example, I know at one time, I live in Roxbury, Boston, Massachusetts, and it's a neighborhood in Boston, and you go and you're walking down the street and you don't know whether or not somebody's going to do a drive-by shooting, right? You don't know if you're going to get caught in the crossfire of something. I remember one time, was it back in 2010, Reverend Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, where there was like a shootout in broad daylight. I don't mean to laugh, but it's just like, are you serious? But this is what happens when you're in this kind of environment. So you're constantly trying to be just vigilant and alert. So, for the incident with George Floyd, especially as a 9-year-old,
and I think what people don't realize or may not realize is that this is the kind of trauma that can last that child's lifetime.
Yep.
It's not going to go away. It's not going to be like,
you're not going to forget, that this ever happened.
yeah, you're not going to just forget this in a few weeks because it gets you at your very core. So there's a generation between us. Well, actually, there's probably several generations. There's 40 years between you and me in how we look at things and see things. And I know there's so many things that we differ on, but how do you cope? How do people your age cope? Because, I see people who cope by coming to church. I also see people cope, like you said, by drinking all day. What do you think your generation does to cope with the kind of trauma you see and experience every day?
Absolutely. So you mentioned, when it comes to trauma, it seems as though it's an attack on all sides. You're not just getting it from outside, you're getting it from inside, you're getting it from your relationships, maybe your job or whatever the case may be. I see it the same way in terms of coping. I see it the same way on how I cope. I'm listening to music. On one end, I'm listening to music. Another end, I'm venting about it to like a friend. Another time, I'm seeking counseling, professional help, if I really feel as though this is not something that I can resolve on my own. So when I'm coping, when I think about coping for me, it's wraparound support on all fronts.
Now, you seek professional help, but that's not something that's really done in this neighborhood. Why
I can't
have
get
you
my daddy to do it.
really? So your relatives don't even believe it, and culturally they don't. I think a lot of people don't believe in that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. I think part of it is, they've gone through so much. You just learn how to keep on going. You resolve some things possibly, but you just keep on going. Especially, when you have kids. My family's from Barbados. Immigrant family, and so you come to this country not with much. You just got to figure it out. You got to adapt, and you got to adapt quickly if you want to survive. And so I think a lot of times and you don't have to be an immigrant family, but anybody who has a lot on their plate and feels as though they don't have enough time to just sit down and talk about things because somebody else is demanding something from them, they're going to just keep on going, and they'll figure it out. And maybe I will have a drink every now and again, or a lot, So the coping is definitely different for each person. In our minds, it's like, well, I'm alive still, but I'm alive, I'm drinking all the time, but listen,
and
I'm not killing anybody, so,
But what we're finding at the Corey Johnson program is that we think we're adapting, and we are adapting. We think that's coping, but it's really not healthy coping. Because if you are, and all of us, this is not just your relatives, not you, it's all of us. When we think, well, I'll just have a drink and I'll be feeling better, or I'll just not think about it and I'll feel better. We are learning in our program that because this stuff is suppressed in you, it comes up in other ways. It comes up in health issues, physical health issues, mental health issues. We got to figure out a new way to cope.
So how was it for you, though? Like when you were growing up, the violence that you see today, was it like this during, while you were growing up?
I think the trauma when I was a kid was more, I grew up in the South during the civil rights movement, so I got to see the beginning of that. So racial trauma was something that we lived with. We lived with white kids driving through the neighborhood throwing Molotov cocktails at houses, and you'd hear about that. We heard about lynching. The first dead body I saw was that of Emmett Till, which was on the cover of Jet magazine back in the 50s.
Yep, I remember.
And I was a little kid.
I saw the pictures. I mean, clearly I wasn't there.
And I haven't forgotten it. And I'm way past 50. Well, actually, I'm way past 60, but we don't want to talk. We'll talk about that another time. So what I'm saying is that stuff stays with you, especially if you don't understand it. It just stays at the bottom of your heart, and it's always there. And I believe for me, just like I suggest for this neighborhood, we got to find a way to heal.
Yeah.
We got to find a way to heal. Do you think that these kids, from what you saw on that trial, do you think they'll get the healing that they need? The 9-year-old and the
I always think about people from older generations. They always say, just wait a little longer. Just you'll know by and by. They kind of just try to emphasize that over time you learn. If you want to survive, if you have this innate desire to want to thrive and eventually be happy, you learn different ways to either, like you said, heal in a healthy way or just cope in a negative way. I think at some point, especially because I'm sure, and I would like to believe that they'll have a lot of support, the 9-year-old and 8-year-old, everybody who witnessed it, resources will be available to them to really begin to start to heal, but it's definitely going to be a journey. I mean, it's a journey. There are things that I thought I would, never have to deal with. I'm like, wait. And then one day you think that you're fine, and then you wake up and it's on your mind. It's like, but this happened 10 or 15 or whatever years ago. Why is this still on my mind today? So there's definitely gonna be moments of feeling like you're having a setback, but it's a journey.
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
Well, we're going to continue this journey because I want to ask you more about what you have to cope with just getting by living around Roxbury.
And I hope to learn more too with you.
Absolutely. Well, we'll continue it. But that's it for this week's Just Between Us. This is our premiere episode, but there's much more to talk about between Judelle and me, between all of us. And we hope you'll continue to join us in these conversations. If you want to learn more about the Corey Johnson program, visit our website at rpcsocialimpactctr.org. That's rpcsocialimpactctr.org. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.